next reader is Chris James. He is reading a short story entitled The Crooked Tree, and his favorite horror film is the original Pumpkinhead.
Hi everybody, my name is Chris James. Unfortunately it's just an excerpt, so you might be a little bit disappointed with the ending. See how it goes. It was late on a midsummer Thursday when Franklin's father pulled into the driveway. Franklin was on the grass in the front yard and recognized the black car that he hadn't seen in over a month and stood up, stopping in the middle of a game with his action figures. Bits of freshly cut grass clung to his bare feet, and his bare shoulders were a light red from the sun. Franklin walked up to the edge of the driveway and admired the car's paint. The day before Franklin's 8th birthday, which was almost a year ago, his father had given him a red wagon. The paint was chipped and the handle had broken. This was my wagon when I was your age, so it's a little worn out, but now you have a car like me. The black car's paint wasn't chipped, but Franklin didn't mind as long as it could take him far away. A door opened and his father stepped out of the car. "Dad!" He ran and threw his arms around his father's waist and tousled his hair, which was long and black just like his father's. "Hey, buddy." Franklin looked up at his father, but his eyes were on the action figures in Franklin's red wagon. His father went down onto a knee and put a hand on each shoulder. "Are you still hearing the voices?" he asked, motioning to the toys with his head. Franklin chewed on his lip and avoided his father's gaze. He had started hearing the grating voice nearly a year ago, just a few days before his birthday, and when he told his parents, he could see the worry on their faces. It wasn't until a few days later that he started talking back to the voice. Conversations slowly grew more frequent until eventually Franklin could feel the voice's presence at all times. He lied to his parents, telling them that it was his toys that he was talking to, so they wouldn't be scared of him. His father accepted it without question, saying it was okay to have a good imagination, but sometimes he was playing with his toys and talking to the voice, he would notice his mother staring at him. Once she had even yelled at him for talking to the voice. "You're giving it power, Franklin." Her voice was trembling and frantic. The way she talked about the voice made Franklin wonder if she heard it too. "Quit scaring the boys," father told her. They started fighting a lot after that night. Franklin, his father, put his finger under his chin and lifted it so their eyes met. "It's okay. There isn't anything wrong with you. You know that, right?" Franklin looked away again, but his father forced him to look back into his eyes. "Right?" Franklin nodded. "Come here." His father opened up his arms and smiled. He smiled back and wrapped both arms around him. "I missed you, Daddy." "I missed you too, buddy." His father stood up and looked towards the house. "He's lying," the voice sang out, but Franklin ignored it. "All right, now go play," he said, patting Franklin on the head before going up the front steps and into the house. Franklin avoided looking at the car, walked back to his toys, and sat down. He played with his toys for a few minutes, set apart the good guys and the bad guys, then played out a battle between the two sides. It was a long fight, eventually coming down to just one person on each side. The voice was cheering for the bad guy, telling him to eviscerate his enemies. Just as the good guy was about to deliver the final blow, Franklin heard screaming inside of the house. He dropped his action figures and stood up, facing the house. The front door opened slightly, followed by a scream. "He isn't going to therapy!" Then the door slammed shut again, shaking the house and making Franklin flinch. A piece of blue paint flaked off the house as it shook. His father had told him that the paint was really old and that's why it came off sometimes. "This old house has been through a lot," he said. Then he told Franklin that they would paint it together like new someday. Franklin didn't think they would get a chance because his father didn't come home very often anymore. "Daddy hates it here. Hates you," the voice taunted. He learned pretty quickly that the voice said mean things, but it had never lied to him about anything. Franklin was scared that it was telling the truth now, too. The door opened slightly again, and another flake of paint fell from the house. Blue paint pieces reminded Franklin of tears, and he wondered if the house was sad, too. "We don't need you," his mother screamed. His mother's scream was so loud that Franklin covered his ears. His father opened the door and stepped out on the front steps. Then he turned around. "You may not, but Franklin does. You're making him think the voices are real." He slammed the door shut one last time. "Voices?" the whisper in his ear said. "Only you and me, Franklin." Franklin stood with his hands gripped tight as his father sat down on the last step. "Come here," he said, opening his arms to show it was okay. His father... Wait. Maybe not. Okay. Slowly, Franklin walked into his father's embrace. "Can I go with you?" he asked, pressing his head against his father's stomach. "Not right now, but maybe soon." His father's voice was trembling the way Franklin's did when he was about to cry. "Why not?" "Your mommy and I just need some time apart to think about grown-up stuff." Franklin took a step back and looked at his father. It's because of me, isn't it? Of course not. Franklin knew he was lying. How long are you going to be gone? I'm not sure, bud. His father stood up and wrapped one arm around the back of his head, drawing him into a belly-high hug. The shaking in his voice was even worse. Don't worry, Franklin. I'll always be your daddy. Franklin felt tears on his face, so he closed his eyes and tightened his grip. Don't leave, he begged. Don't leave, the voice taunted. Franklin, the door opened again, and Franklin's mother was calling to him. Get inside. The door closed. I have to go or your mom will be even more upset. Franklin tightened his grip. I don't care. His father's big hands pulled him apart, his arms apart, and held him at an arm's length away. Listen to me, Franklin. Your mother is wrong, and the voices aren't real. Firm grip told him to stay put as his father walked to the car and got inside. He knew that his father was scared. He also knew that he was wrong about the voices. Real as can be, the voice laughed. Then Franklin watched his father leave again. He stayed outside after his father left. He had stood watching his black car turned off of his block and out of view, and it wasn't long before he gave up hope of the car coming back and sat down with his toys, wiping away tears. Slowly he picked up the previously battling good and bad guy. Battle began again, but this time it was slow. Each blow against the enemy barely registered as Franklin half-heartedly knocked the two action figures together. He was still crying, so it was hard to have fun. Eviscerate! The voice screamed as the bad guy took down the good guy. Shut up, Franklin said, dropping the toys to the ground. Or they'll cry? Shut up! He screamed, clutching his hands over his ears and wishing the voice would just go away. You're not real! The voice drew in closer. You know better. Franklin took his hands away from his ears and stood up. Again, the voice was bright. He had never seen whatever the voice belonged to, but Franklin could feel its presence. It was the first and last thing he felt every day, creeping in the back of his mind until it chose to bend to his ear and whisper a truth Franklin didn't want to hear. I can make you a family again, the voice offered. How? Franklin asked as he wiped the tears away and struggled to keep himself from crying even more. He could feel the voice drift away from him and down the block. You have to come to me. You promise? Never lied to you before. Franklin decided the voice was right, and although he didn't know how far it wanted him to go, he knew it would be worth it if he had a family again. Glancing at the living room window in the front of the house and making sure his mother wasn't watching, he started walking towards the end of the block and towards the voice. It led him away from his house, navigating block by block at first. Left, straight 2 blocks, right, left, straight 6 blocks. Franklin wasn't sure how long he had walked before the voice stopped directing him, and he started walking on his own. He didn't know why, but the path seemed obvious. Straight 4 blocks, left, right, through someone's lawn, and 2 more blocks straight. The sun had already begun to set by the time Franklin felt close to where the voice wanted him to be. Street lamps guided his steps in the darkness as he tried to stick to the sidewalk that eventually ended and forced him to walk barefoot on the street. But the street also ended, stopping suddenly as Franklin's eyes were focused on where he was going. He looked back to make sure he remembered where to go, and saw the last 2 street lamps at the end of the road. Franklin stood on a worn path now, with tall grass on either side, which led into the woods. The mouth of the woods opened up wide above the path, and a single white tree stood in front of all others. Its color reminded him of teeth, and the branches stuck out in every direction, but twisted and curled around one another. The biggest of the branches was entirely straight and reached over the path, but it ended with 3 more branches that forked downward like the claw of a vending machine. Franklin walked towards the tree and stopped in the center of the path. Reaching up, he tried to touch the 3-pronged claw of the big branch. Just as his outstretched fingers brushed against the first prongs, he was pushed away from the tree. Don't touch, the familiar voice told him, but he noticed it was solid and closer than ever. He looked past the tree and saw a creature standing in front of him, just beneath the white claw. It had 2 white horns that were as twisted as the branches of the tree and looked almost 2 feet long. Brown fur covered most of its body except for its face and palms. The creature's face held huge brown eyes and a wide, smiling mouth that held teeth like 100 white toothpicks. The creature was even shorter than Franklin, and its abnormally long arms dragged on the ground, leaving marks from the long, thick fingernails at the end of its hands. Ah, Franklin cried out and turned to run, but a familiar voice held him in place. No running! As he turned and looked at it once again, Franklin realized that the voice had always belonged to that creature. Franklin also saw before he turned back to the creature that the road was gone, and the street lamps had died out. All the trees that made up the woods around him were also gone, placed by countless white crooked trees with twisted branches, just like the one he had seen only a minute ago. Where am I? Franklin knew that he had reached the place where the voice wanted him to be, but he was afraid. Simon's domain, the creature replied, stretching its long arms wide so Franklin knew it meant the entire twisted wood around him. Simon. Franklin finally was able to put a name to the voice he had been talking to for so long. He had asked the name once before, but the voice had refused. Simon rubbed his two hands together and stared at Franklin with his big eyes. What are you? He asked the creature. Simon growled, showing all his teeth. Stupid questions. You want to be a family again or not? Franklin nodded and tried not to scream as he noticed several white patches of red splattered along Simon's brown fur and staining his teeth. Good. Simon turned, dragging his long arms along the ground as he walked up to the crooked tree. Digging his nails in the tree with one hand and wrapping his other arm around the tree, he grabbed out a big brown bag, and Franklin thought he heard someone screaming as the nails twisted in the tree. With both of his hands wrapped around the top of the bag, Simon kept it shut while he lifted it in one motion and plopped it on the ground in front of Franklin. What is that? Franklin asked. Simon growled again. Riddle bag. He opened up the top of the bag enough to peek inside where Franklin could see only darkness. Pick one out. Answer right and Simon makes you a family again. What if I get it wrong? Simon smiled, showing hundreds of tiny blood-spattered teeth. You'll see.